and welcome to another episode of Accessibility. It's a show on YouTube where I talk about the video game industry, accessibility, and representation. Basically, how can we help more people to play games, and more people to see themselves in the games they play? By the time you're watching this video, it's going to be a little while after E3 2021. I don't know exactly when I'm putting this video up, but I'm going to guess it was about 2 to 4 weeks ago that E3 happened. Since the show, I have had the opportunity to check out a bunch of demos for games that were shown off during E3. Some of the demos were good, some of them were bad, some of them were interesting. But there's one demo in particular I want to take some time to talk about today. One of the more interesting games I've played since E3 is the demo for Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. Put simply, it seems to be a Dark Souls or a Neo-style game set in the world of the original Final Fantasy. You got big weapons, you've got magic attacks, you've got big bosses to fight, you can do dodge rolls to get out of the way, you can do your light attacks and your heavy attacks, you've got parries, you've got blocks. Basically, very tough combat, try and get through a very sort of grim dark world. In essence, this kind of feels like Final Fantasy Dark Souls, with one big difference. Accessibility. There are certain game design decisions made here that are going to make this game more playable to a wider variety of people than your typical Dark Souls game. That being said, don't confuse this. I'm not saying that this game is doing an amazing job in terms of accessibility. There are a lot of very specific accessibility settings that are missing here and are lacking, but in terms of how this has been designed as a Dark Souls style game, I think it's going to be more playable for many people than Dark Souls itself. So today, on Accessibility, we're going to talk about Final Fantasy Origin. We're going to talk about how the game handles checkpointing. We're going to talk about the way that the game handles loss of progression on death, or lack of loss of progression on death. And we're going to talk about the game's inclusion of difficulty modes, and what I think this means for the ongoing discussion of would Dark Souls suck if it had an easy mode. Let's start off by talking about some of the overall design choices made by Stranger of Paradise, Final Fantasy Origin, which may make the game more approachable if you've previously not found yourself enjoying Dark Souls-style titles. While many hallmarks of the Souls games are present here, such as bonfires that players return to upon death, and can use to heal at the cost of respawning enemies, the execution of these types of mechanics is a lot more lenient here than From Software's titles. Losing experience or spendable currency upon death, and needing to recover it before your next death, is a hallmark of FromSoft's Souls titles, but it's not present at all in Final Fantasy Origin. If you die, you lose nothing, simply jumping in for another shot. While some fans of the Souls games may not enjoy this change, it does make progression more predictable, something welcoming to some players. Additionally, bonfire checkpoints are more generously placed in Origin, at least in the demo. The demo's primary boss fight has a bonfire right outside the door, so that players can get right back into the tough fight straight away after a failed encounter, rather than needing to retraverse large portions of the level. As a result of this forgiving checkpointing, I found that this boss's difficulty spike on normal mode was less of a barrier to my enjoyment. I was a lot more willing to persevere with a tough boss when I could fight it back to back with minimal breaks between attempts, and go into every attempt with a full set of healing items because those replenish upon death. So, let's get to the topic you've likely been waiting for: difficulty modes. Let's just be direct. Final Fantasy Origin demonstrates that you can add an easy mode to a Dark Souls style game without impacting the experience for the bulk of players, and still offer a challenge to easy mode players, but one that is reduced to a lower skill ceiling. Easy mode in Origins lowers enemy health, boosts player damage, reduces a little variation in the enemy attack roster, and allows players to block both physical and magical attacks with their standard non-timing based block, rather than just physical damage. The game's still going to be a challenge for some players, but it's a toned back challenge, a little more accessible. In normal mode, this plays like a Dark Souls game. Sure, the checkpointing's a little more forgiving, and you don't drop your souls upon death, but the fights are right up there difficulty-wise with the Dark Souls. Hard mode is pretty ridiculous. It ramps up enemy damage and health, it makes the game considerably tougher. I've completed every Souls game, and I found this demo prohibitively tough on this difficulty. And that's great! More power to those of you who want something tougher than Dark Souls is giving you. All 3 difficulty modes exist, and everything has turned out fine. I've yet to see the internet decry the game as terrible for having an easy mode in its demo. It simply has one, and it makes the game playable for a wider variety of people. Dark Souls could very much do this. Just tell people that you beat it on normal or hard if you want the cred that comes with being some kind of elite gamer. It's not that difficult. Talking more generally about accessibility settings, however, in this game, Final Fantasy Origin is pretty bare bones. Subtitles are a single setting toggle, on or off, and you can't custom remap controls outside of a couple of presets. There are volume mixer sliders, but that's the most in-depth the setting menu gets. The game's also pretty dark visually, which is not going to be great for visibility for some disabled players. In terms of accessibility, it's not great outside of what it offers in terms of accessibility for difficulty. Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin isn't a perfect game, or at the very least this demo is far from perfect, but what it does really well is it paints a really interesting picture of what an easy mode in a game like Dark Souls could look like, and ways that you could change the build of a game like that to make it more accessible to more people. As someone with ADHD, I really enjoyed being able to get right back into a boss fight as soon as I lost it. I enjoy Dark Souls games as much as the next person, but there is a bit of my brain that really struggles with I want to get back to the boss, oh, I have to trek from the last checkpoint and that's going to take me a while. I really liked knowing that if I failed, I could just jump right back in, get back to what I was doing, and if I was really struggling, if I hit a roadblock that I just couldn't get past, it was nice knowing that easy mode was there. It does feel important to note that Elden Ring, the next game from Dark Souls developer FromSoft, will apparently be easier and more accessible to first-time players. It's not going to have difficulty modes, but we do know that there's an open world structure that means you'll be able to skip some bosses if they're causing you particular trouble, and generally I get the impression that because George R.R. Martin's name is attached, FromSoft expects a bunch of Game of Thrones watchers and readers who don't usually play video games to come to this, and they don't want to scare them off with the typical FromSoft level of difficulty, or at least that's how I understand the quotes that have been going around. That being said, I do wonder if the audience that loves Dark Souls is going to respond in any particular way to this game being a bit easier. I know a lot of people are really anticipating it, and I quietly wonder whether we might get the difficulty in a FromSoft game discussion going in reverse with Elden Ring. We might see people saying, well, can you make a harder difficulty for us? Because that's what we find difficult, and it's different to what these people find difficult. One can only hope that that would eventually lead to, hey, maybe we make an easy mode for those people and a harder mode for these people, and we make that game more accessible that way. I feel like I'm dreaming at this point, but one can hope, right? So, yes, Dark Souls, you can put an easy mode in. You can put a hard mode in. You can put things into the game that make it more accessible to a wider variety of people. Final Fantasy Origin is already starting to show that you can do that, and it's not going to break your formula entirely. You can still have a very tough, brutal game and have a checkpoint outside the boss door, maybe, even if you want to put it there for easy mode people. You can have that as an option. Maybe make it an accessibility option. I don't know. Make games more accessible to more people.